Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the European Union? Guess what one of the requirements is to diversify trade to the United Kingdom? Guess what one of the requirements will be to diversify trade to emerging Asia? Is to have a form of price on carbon.
You've likely heard claims that carbon tax is driving up the cost of living. What if removing carbon pricing could actually harm Canada's economy? And what if the very individuals criticizing it today were instrumental in creating a system that now makes carbon pricing essential? First, let's acknowledge the undeniable reality. Climate change is a real economic burden, not just a philanthropist endeavor. The Canadian Climate Institute reports that climate-related damages are expected to reduce Canada's GDP by $25 billion in 2025, about half of the projected growth for 2025. Health implications are equally concerning. Health Canada has identified that climate change is increasing risk to health systems in Canada and can disrupt care and services during extreme weather conditions. I've already talked about this in a previous video, so I won't harp on it too much. But it's important to remember that everything in life has an opportunity cost. While it's easy to demonize carbon tax as this cost-driving mechanism, it's important to remember carbon tax's main aim is to curb climate change and the costs associated. If carbon tax is removed, which means we continue to emit greenhouse gases just unchecked, we will have to deal with far greater costs as a result of that. It is important to acknowledge climate change as an economic burden, and also to acknowledge that there is real studies showing climate change policies like carbon tax were not the primary drivers of cost of living since their introduction.
European Union trade agreement is even larger and more ambitious than the North American Free Trade Agreement. It is an agreement that will mean more choice and lower prices for hard-working families. An agreement that stands to create tens of thousands of new jobs for Canadians. As I said 2 weeks ago, this is a very big deal. Or as the Canadian Association of Manufacturers and Exporters put it, I like this one, the Wayne Gretzky of trade deals.
Understanding Canada's trade dynamics is crucial. The Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreements, or CETA for short, is a pivotal trade deal between Canada and the European Union. This is a huge deal as the European Union represents a $500 billion market for Canada. This comes in a time when Canada's two biggest trading partners are engaging in tariff warfare with Canada. Sounds great, right? Why don't we diversify our trades more and go into the EU? It does, unless you're anti-carbon policy. See, the EU is pretty serious about climate change. While there are no binding clauses that force Canada to have carbon policy as a result of CETA, there are incentives, and those incentives are reinforced with soft power. See, CETA states that nations may not lower environmental policies to a level where they don't match the European Union standards. And so, if Canada were to weaken its climate policies, it risks severely hurting the relationship that Stephen Harper and Justin Trudeau work to develop. And while we face trade wars from our closest neighbor, the EU represents a lucrative market that we just simply cannot turn our noses from. We should be going into the EU as trading partners, not trying to ostracize them. Here's an intriguing connection: the Harper Government, in which Pierre Poilievre served as a minister. Harper was instrumental in negotiating CETA. Justin Trudeau simply came and signed the paperwork. Agreements like these are negotiated well ahead of time, and in this case, the legwork was done by the Harper government. Stephen Harper understood the opportunity of having the European Union as a trading partner, and he understood that climate policy was a worthwhile part of creating this trading partner. But somehow Pierre Poilievre now advocates for abolishing carbon tax, even though CETA laid the foundation for the eventual carbon tax. See, eventually the European Union would implement the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM for short. The CBAM imposes tariffs on imports from countries lacking robust carbon pricing. If Canada were to eliminate its carbon pricing, industries like steel, aluminum, and cement could face these EU tariffs, damaging the competitiveness of Canadian goods in the EU. What does that mean though? Well, remember, a tariff is a tax. If your product is being tariffed, the product is more expensive in the country issuing the tariff. As a result, those foreign consumers will simply find alternatives once that come free of tariffs. So if we are to seek alternate business opportunities in the European Union, we will not find it there if we remove the carbon tax, and America will inevitably come back to the same mindset once they have a liberal leadership running the show, and they too will want goods that come with a low carbon footprint. So why doesn't Canada just follow Trump's approach when it comes to climate policies? He's just sidelining them. Why not follow suit? Well, Canada's economic landscape just is so different. Canada's currency is often classified as a commodity currency, meaning its value is closely tied to global commodity prices. Since Canada's economy heavily depends on resource exports, particularly oil, fluctuations in commodity demand or prices can cause the Canadian dollar to rise or fall significantly. This reliance on exports makes strong trade agreements essential for maintaining economic stability and protecting the value of our currency. In contrast, the US has a much more diversified economy with a strong tech, finance, and manufacturing sectors, meaning global demand for USD remains high regardless of commodity price fluctuations. Institutions and individuals worldwide invest in the American dollar, making it far more stable. Because of this fundamental difference, Canada just simply cannot afford to absorb the economic costs of sidelining climate policies in the same way America can. With ongoing trade tensions between America, Canada, and China, maintaining strong ties with the European Union is more crucial than ever. Pierre Poilievre promises to axe the tax and fast-track oil production projects. But here's the irony, he was part of the very administration that laid the groundwork for carbon pricing. In the short term, cutting environmental policies may create jobs, but what about the long-term consequences? If Canada weakens its climate commitments, we risk losing preferential trade access or facing tariffs. And what happens if the US shifts back to pro-climate leadership in a few years, demanding carbon-vetted goods? This would undo years of progress and would leave us to scramble to play catch-up, and that in itself comes with economic costs.